Well, today we're talking about gouache, and it's kind of funny because the general term that, or the other way people say gouache is the opaque watercolors, but the show card color, designer's color, body color, and transparent watercolor that is mixed with. It dries quickly to a somewhat chalky matte surface, and it allows for a finished appearance that is sort of a subtle feeling. And just a little bit of the history on that. Although not until the pre-Renaissance did they consider that a true artistic medium, it has been used for many, many years, including, of course, back to cave paintings. That's opaque. It was pigments mixed with, so they say, okay, they're using that, but basically under the definition of taking the pigments that would normally be used as watercolors and adding opaque materials to it to create a surface that then will stand out is kind of where gouache is coming from. And even, for example, in the we can find the motif panels dated back to the 3rd century CE in Bactria, Afghanistan. So again, you're finding this throughout history. In Egypt as well, they used this opaque watercolor to write on the papyrus in the paper. There was a monk that added zinc to a watercolor for the use of illustrating manuscripts. And from that, it started to become popular among artists. And so you find that it's used more starting in the Renaissance and then throughout history. Then it's still used very much for illustration. And in fact, today, you can find what's called designer gouache, which is specifically, it's marketable primarily for designers and illustrators. But what it does is it allows certain pigments to mix better together. They've been trying to improve the technology for the gouache. And one thing you will find is that gouache is used with a lot of different mediums. In the 1940s, there was an artist by the name of Aaron Borod, who basically, and this is very common actually with people who use gouache, you'll often find watercolor, gouache, pen, ink, but that underlayer is often the transparent watercolor, and then they slowly build on to other aqueous media. You can really get some really great results.
The gouache we're going to use today in the class, does it mix with each other, or is it?
We've got the designer's gouache.
Cool. And is there white with gouache or not?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. In fact, that's used often the highlight brighter colors. I know we talked last class period about the oils being the most vibrant and the gouache and that sort of thing. Really, you'll find, and with Francis Picabia is one of my favorites and my artist for this time. He's using watercolor and these are gouache outlays. But you'll find one that's really vibrant. You'll just see how there's that certain opaque sensibility over the different lines, and so this is definitely where the white is being used. It's from the 1940s. Did something that I thought pretty interesting, and this is Adolf Dehn, D-E-H-N. But he actually used varnish and painted varnish over his gouache paintings and framed them without the glass frame and put it in the oil painting exhibition. It's sort of, I'm allowed to do that, I don't know, but basically it was something that he found the varnish not only made it kind of that glossy feeling because you have a matte finish when you use the gouache, but this varnish made the darkers darker and made other colors more vibrant. So, methods and techniques?
All right, methods and techniques. I wasn't sure how to present this because I feel this medium is so flexible that if originally I thought about just doing a technique and showing step by step how I painted a banana. This is my first attempt at gouache. And I was very pleased with this medium. And I think this medium is what I've been looking for, in the sense that it did what I thought watercolor was going to do. And I've been working with acrylics for years, watering them down, which I find is wrong. This is the happy medium for me. And this was just a matter of several steps. Here are the steps that I took. And what I did was I had read about one of the authors. To get a certain mood in his paintings, he laid down a wash of color first. If he wanted a cool mood, he would put down green. So I thought, well, I'll put down yellow first, and you can kind of see the yellow in the background. And then I sketched the banana. And I let that dry, and then I went back in and I gave the banana some depth with some yellow and red. Just as simple washes where I collected more color where I knew there was going to be a shadow. Brown, then I added the shadow and built the shadow up. If you look at the shadow, and I'll pass it around, you'll see the shadow is a combination of ultramarine and burnt sienna. But within this shadow, there's very nice little pools of color, and I think is what gives gouache a very alluring effect. So I'm leery of telling you an exact way of doing this because you can apply it in different ways.
Now, could you give some absolutely don't?
The biggest no-no is putting it on too thick.
What happens?
And past it, it cracks. It deals with opacity. You got to lay it. It does dry really quick. I will say that it dries really fast. But to expedite this, this is 4 layers for a nice flat layer area.
So in other words, in order to get something opaque, you should, again, be patient, just like you have to do with watercolors, and put it on in thinner layers.
Right. Gouache is excellent for detail. And I know there's people in this class from seeing what you've done previously. I think you'll love it because you can hold great detail with it as long as you're patient and let the layers dry, and they will dry quickly. In fact, you can work. One thing that I did read about, and I was curious, so I thought I would try, is gouache on a gesso panel. Kind of a love-hate thing. I didn't really like what I was seeing because it was puddling up. When it's on the paper is going to absorb that, a lot of the water and some of the pigment, but here it just rests right on the surface. There wasn't enough tooth. And in fact, if you look closely, like Nathan was talking about acrylics, when you get them really wet with water, how that pigment just kind of floats, and the particles spread. And that's what I had here. I never set it aside. I just kept working in different parts of the face, letting it dry. And you go back, add a little more, a little more. Here's some examples of opacity. There's white on top of green there. And this was stuff I couldn't demo here, so I thought I would do some of it in advance. Cynthia has is much better. You see the streaks there. Maybe you didn't. Where the pigment is sort of holding onto the paper, unlike watercolor, which is a lot finer. You can see the watercolor a lot more fluid. Not a huge difference, really. You can see the watercolors going into the paper quicker.
Wet on wet, and you put what I found, and again, various thicknesses, but wet surface with watercolor, that will want to bleed and continue going. There's no real substance that's holding it. Where I found the other day when I was using gouache,
There's still a lot to experiment with. But I think I was in such a habit of...
All right, well, this is good. This will be really great. We'll have a good demo, and I think let's give them a round of applause.